What's up, Corey? What are you doing?
Oh, hey, just reading this book here.
Yeah, is that any good?
Yeah, it is really good. Hey, you're an author, right?
I tell people I am.
Okay. Well, if you were to write a book on travel, what would you do?
Ooh, I'd probably go on a long walk, like to at least the end of my street.
Okay, that's pretty far for you.
Mm-hmm.
Well, Steve Hunter, who wrote Relish in the Tread here, he actually walked 3,000 kilometers across Europe to Istanbul. This is Steve's second story. Welcome to Second Story, everyone. My name's Corey Leckie. With me, as always, is Josh Sabalski. And today we have a very special guest, Steve Hunter. Steve Hunter, you're from Sarnia, but you've done a bunch of traveling around the globe, and you've written a book. So let's get into that.
It's called Relish in the Tread. So, I guess people are trying to find catchy titles for their books so that they get more readers on Amazon. But I'm not really, why did I independently publish this? I grew up on punk rock, going to oddballs in Sarnia,
Me too.
in the basement, and, listening to these random kids playing random music, and it was great. Like the band shell at Canatera, we'd all go there. Like I've just always been sort of counterculture, so I don't really. I have a really hard time, you know, creating things that fit in the mold.
Right.
Hence, hitchhiking 120,000 kilometers across the world. Yeah, so Relish in the Tread, it's a play on words. Relish in the tread of your boot. So like either, hot dog sauce or whatever else stuck in the tread of your boot, annoying you while you walk along the way. Or else relishing, enjoying, like deeply enjoying, like really taking in the soles of your shoes and feeling the earth. So the book is about the time that I spent walking across Europe. I did 3,000 kilometers. So one summer I decided to walk the Camino de Santiago, which is a very famous commercial pilgrimage way in Europe, across Spain. And the most popular route is from a place called Saint-Jean-Pied-de-Port in the Basque area of France. And then 20 kilometers later, you end up in Spain, over a little part of the Pyrenees in what's called Roncesvalles. And it's a couple more days to Pamplona, which is that's like the big city in Spanish Basque, where all the bulls run. So basically, it just follows this old pilgrimage trail until you reach this cathedral, Santiago de Compostela. Majority of people stop there. For me, I'm not religious. Again, punk rock. So there was no reason. Sorry, I didn't walk it for any kind of religious purpose, nor spiritual, because most people say, oh, you must be so spiritual now that you've been to India and Bangladesh and uh, you know Middle East. And I'm like, no, not at all. Actually, I'm almost like signed off on nihilism. um, Not that I don't believe in anything and I think nothing is worthless. It's just that, nothing really matters. You're everything comes down to what you choose yourself. You know what I mean? If I want to walk across Europe, I just make it happen.
Right.
I don't, I don't like, when I twisted my ankle in a ditch overgrown by grass because I got drunk the night before. I'm not like, oh, why is the why is the world cursing me? It's like, man, it's my own damn fault.
So you're taking ownership for your own life. Yeah.
Yeah, and essentially, I think I'm sorry, but I think religion really takes away ownership from people, and they start saying, oh well, it's God's will. Like I taught some classes in Egypt. I learned how to teach English there, and somebody wouldn't show up for class, and they'd be like, Inshallah, which means God's will. It's like, come on, bro.
Yeah. Come see,
Anyway,
come
so
saw of Egypt.
yeah. Come see, come sa, yeah. So at the cathedral, when everybody's crying and celebrating the end of their walk, I've still got 3 more days until the coast because I had lived in Australia, traveling around Australia. I worked as a carny, um, made a bunch of money, and was able to sort of roam around and spend a lot of time on beaches. I fell in love with beaches. Growing up in Sarnia, we have beaches.
They're pretty rocky. Yeah, they're not we rave about our blue coast, but it's not the nicest of
Yeah, like
beach
on a
country.
perfectly, when the sun is angled at the right.
Yeah.
Anyhow,
It's hitting the industrial like just
yeah,
so nice. Like beautiful plants just being illuminated by the sunset. Yeah.
What do they call that? Plastic Valley or
Chemi- Chemical Valley. Yeah.
Chemical Valley? Yeah, there you go. The sun
Chemical
hitting
Valley,
Chemical
man.
Valley. Yeah, there
The
you go.
fifth most polluted industrial city on the planet, I read some years ago, is Sarnia, Ontario.
That's
Uh,
wild.
so anybody asks me like, "Oh, where are you from?" I'm like, "The fifth most polluted industrial city in the world." They're like, "Wait, you're from India?"
Not quite.
You don't
Yeah.
look Chinese. Like,
Yeah, that's
no,
right. Yeah.
Yeah, that is
no.
weird.
Shanghai.
Is it the most in North America, or is there another city in North America that's more
It's
polluted?
fighting with Montreal.
Oh, that's weird. Montreal of all places.
Yeah, because the outside of Montreal is all industrial.
Yeah, that's true.
And
Interesting.
Paris is another really big one as far as Western cities. And then the next, like the top three are Chinese and Indian.
Hmm.
Top four, top whatever.
Yeah.
But but yeah, so our claim to fame in the armpit of Canada. Uh,
I wonder if that led to kind of that punk rock. There was a lot of punk rock back when I
there
think we're
was,
around the same age.
yeah,
So, like SRB and PUD and I was
yeah,
actually in
SRB
a
man. I
punk.
went to school with SRB. I went to school with those guys.
Yeah, nice. I was actually in a punk rock band back in the day called Case Face, and we used to
Oh yeah,
do some of those battle of the bands and
Battle of the
all that
Bands.
fun
Yeah,
stuff.
yeah. Like I haven't really noticed. Like I've come back and I've been around. Like I bicycle around and I try and like I got back in the summer, so I had to look around and I don't know. There's not. It doesn't seem like there's that many things for youth to get into now. Like we had
No,
we had that the Y where the Riverside is now, where that
yeah.
homeless shelter or whatever I should call it. And
You don't have to be too politically correct on
Yeah, no,
this
you're
show.
good. Yeah. They know that they don't have a home. They're
right.
sure.
I mean,
Yeah.
man,
They
I
won't
just
be
spent
watching.
15 years being a homeless
Mm.
traveler, so I'm side by side, man. I was okay, so I got a good story. I'm coming down the way from Monaco on the Côte Côte d'Azur, which is the southeast of France, Nice, Cannes, Cannes Film Festival,
Yeah.
um, and then the big cities, Marseille. Uh, and in that area, it's super posh, really expensive. I got my tent. Um, and I arrive on the outskirts of Nice on the seaside quite late, and I see a couple of tents. So I'm like, oh, great. There's other travelers here doing the same thing. Perfect. So I put my tent up and I put one of my pegs directly into some poo.
Okay.
Nice.
What? You don't know what kind of poo?
I was assuming that it was dog poo
Okay.
because we were on the coast, so I could see people walking their dog. I woke up in the morning. So luckily I had the sea there that I could wash my hands off, and in the morning I could wash my tent off. So it wasn't too gnarly, but
Yeah.
it was a spanner in the gearbox. Um, so I woke up in the morning and the other tents were still there, and I was going to introduce myself, but I realized they were actually like proper homeless, and they were squatting there long term. So I realized that I put my tent in their toilet.
Oh, lovely.
Ah.
Yeah,
Yeah, that's awesome.
So you do. So
yeah.
you do know what kind of poo it was then.
It all came full circle.
There's something worse about that too.
Yeah. Not knowing would have been so much better.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah. That
Totally.
was just some dog shit. So I got a question about, like, obviously you've traveled a lot. I think it said you've been close to 100 countries.
Yeah,
When
88
Yeah, there you
by
go. Wow.
counting.
Okay. When people talk to you about this, and we're probably going to be in this group too, do they come at you with a lot of misconceptions about other places in the world? Because you think about what we hear in the
Hmm.
West about, like, I read you traveled to Palestine, for example,
Yeah.
and we hear a lot about Palestine and that geographical area. Going to a place like that, or going to a place like Israel, for example, because I know you traveled there too. Uh, when people come up to you and they talk to you about that sort of place and traveling to those sorts of places, is it, do people have a good idea of what it's actually like, or is everything that we've sort of understood from like media and word of mouth and things like that, are we completely out to lunch on what it's actually like over there, or is it somewhat close? And this can go for other countries too.
I think that for the most part, we're completely out to lunch.
We're being
Uh,
propagandized, is what you're saying.
I not necessarily that. Well, I don't know whether it's intentional or unintentional. Um, there's just a massive naivety to the way things are. I right off the top of my head, not focusing on like any political agenda, but for example, Thailand. A lot of people say, "Oh, poor country." It is
Yeah.
not a poor country, man.
No.
It hasn't been poor for a very long time. Think about all the tourism that's been going there since that movie, The Beach, with Leonardo DiCaprio,
Yeah.
Right.
right? Like Chiang Mai is one of the largest expat digital nomad. That word, by the way, makes me cringe. This,
Nomad.
no,
No.
digital
Oh,
nomad.
digital. Okay. Oh, digital nomad.
Yeah,
Okay. Yeah.
like I've gotten the opportunity to meet some actual nomads and like some Bedouins in the desert and stuff, and like those people, they live roughing it. I'm not saying they have a hard life. They have what they need. They're happy about that. Also in Kyrgyzstan, the guys who are selling sheep, they're not poor. Like I'm not saying they don't have money, but the the lifestyle is pretty tough. Um, and not everybody has money. So there is a lot of lack in infrastructure, and if your teeth hurt, you can't just run over to the dentist because you're out in the middle of the mountains, surrounded by bigger, larger mountains.
Yeah.
And the roads are really awful, so it's going to take you many hours to get to the big city to get your teeth fixed up, or if you break your ankle, or so on and so forth. An ambulance just doesn't arrive and pick you up and drive you over to the hospital, right?
Right.
So they have a pretty rough, uh, difficult job, and their skin is quite leathery from the really hard sun, and so on and so forth. These digital nomads, they sit in these cities, and they make standard Swedish, Canadian, German, Australian wages, which are significantly higher than where they're staying in said country, Cambodia, Laos, Philippines. Let's pick the cheapest country possible where it has the nicest options, and then we can live completely in luxury. This is
Right.
entitlement. and then
Right.
saying, "Oh, look at me and look at my great life. I'm really living." And it's like, wow, okay. Like there's something to be said about having a certain level of humbleness.
Mm-hmm.
Like it's fine that you make money, you make lots of money, you know, good on you, but you don't have to tell everybody. And when you're in a village that has some nice thing, let's say a river running through it where everybody wants to go spend the day on, whether on a boat or whatever, you know, a lot of those villagers live on $100 a day.
Okay.
Sorry, $100 a month.
Oh, okay. Yeah. $100 a
Sorry.
day didn't sound too bad to me.
No, no,
Yeah,
no, no,
$100
no,
a day,
no.
not bad at all.
Sorry, little slip there. No, $100 a month, $150 a month. Uh, in you know in West Africa, 75, $50 a month. So if you're earning 3,000, 4,000, 6,000 bucks a month, I don't think you should be walking around letting them know,
Right.
reminding them. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like there's a reason why people went to India 40, 50 years ago wearing, you know, hippie clothes that people call like these, you know, baggy cotton pants. They kept it really simple because you don't need to be flashing all of your stuff to people who aren't in that environment. You know what I mean? Like I don't know. It kind of frustrates me. Anyway, so this misconception of, oh, you know, poor people, there are certain areas that are still developing, but there's really like very little third world left anymore.
Hmm.
Like it's it's pretty much been, you know, taken care of. Of course, there's certain areas that are hit with, let's say, droughts, like especially Sudan, Somalia, that area of Northeast Africa. They're having a really hard time with the way that weather has changed. You know, the desert is expanding. So as the desert expands, these areas get more arid. They can't grow the way that they used to. They have to move further south. They have to migrate to a different area. So those people are really having it pretty hard. Um, but for the most part, I grew up watching commercials with these African babies with like swollen bellies and flies all over their face with
Yeah.
Hmm.
John Lennon in the background playing Imagine.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm sure you remember this commercial. It was
Absolutely.
every Christmas, and it was like, you know, oh, give some money, help the children. Now, I'm not against that, but I would say probably 70% of that money didn't go to the children. It went to the companies that were running the ads, running all of that stuff, right?
I think it
Um,
went even higher. I think it was like, what didn't they?
Probably even
Wasn't it like
higher.
closer to
Yeah, I'm giving
90?
them the
Yeah.
benefit of the doubt.
Yeah.
Well, that's
That's
nice
very
It
of
was
you.
generous of you. Yeah.
it was in the 80s, so I'm hoping that they were doing better then than they are now. I'm sure
Yeah.
now it's 95.
Yeah. Probably.
or or maybe it's vice versa. Who knows? But I do know that there were 15,000 NGOs in Ghana when I was there, and I'm not really seeing a lot of progress from 15,000 NGOs. You would think that, you know, if there were that many people doing that much infrastructural development, then, you know, the country would be running similar to Slovakia or Czech Republic or Bulgaria or, you know, certain countries that came out of the Soviet Union in the early 90s and had to
Yeah.
really redevelop, reorganize in many different facets.
Poland.
Ghana is still way behind that. They're,
Yeah.
you know what I mean? Uh,
I have a kind of a follow up to go along with that. So you mentioned Somalia. If anybody is familiar with history in the last 30 years, I'm sure you already know this, but a lot of the
the
countries that
Canadian.
do. What's that?
Sorry, no,
As a
sorry.
Canadian?
I thought we were going. Okay, yeah. Sorry.
Yeah, no, I was just gonna say like a lot of the countries. I'm curious how many of these countries you've actually been to, but a lot of the countries that do still have extreme poverty that exists, at least
Mm.
from my what I've read and what I've seen, are countries that are still war torn. So a country like Somalia, which still gets bombed routinely by our neighbors to the south, who will remain nameless, or countries in the Middle East who also continuously get bombed by that country to the south of us. Those countries are obviously still war torn. I wonder, like, have you been to a place like that that's still like actively engaged in either a civil war or something like that? Have you ever traveled to any of those parts?
I No, I couldn't get into. I was at the border of Syria when the war first started, like at the very, very beginning. So they closed the border, and I ended up flying from Jordan to Morocco.
Was that a
I
hard flight to get? Like something like that? No.
No, 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 no. It's super easy and pretty affordable. They're really not that far apart from one another, and there's a lot of transit between all of these Arab countries, so pretty affordable.
I was just
Um,
wondering more on the demand aspect, like trying to get out of there. There would have been a lot of people obviously trying to flee that
No, no, no,
particular
no. It
area.
it wasn't
No.
really like that because it was the very beginning. So like it was more like what is happening?
Hmm.
Like
Yeah.
it kind of it was maybe surprising, like just came out of left field, like really didn't see it coming at all. And I'm talking for most people, at least that's what I understood because I was, 400 kilometers away
Hmm.
a week before and I didn't hear anything about it.
Yeah.
Right.
And I'd been living in Egypt for a few months beforehand, and I didn't hear anything about it. So I was in Egypt for the election, the first democratic election.
Hmm.
So there was like 1.5 million people that gathered in the main square, Tahrir Square in Cairo. Um, Aside from that, there wasn't really any like revolutionary or war like. Uh, I mean, I was in Kurdistan, in Turkey, which had a lot of like Turkish military, um, a lot of checkpoints, a lot of like checking for, they're just making sure that there isn't any terrorism happening or whatnot.
Yeah.
Um, I didn't have a visa at the time. I'd overstayed my visa. I was working illegally. So when the police pulled me over, there was a really huge ordeal. I ended up in a military station, and I was with my Turkish girlfriend, thankfully, because nobody spoke English. And basically, after a few hours, they were like, "Okay, you need to get to the border and go to Georgia right now. We're going to give you a pass. If you get caught again by any military, I can't tell you what's going to happen."
Yeah.
That's
I'm like,
scary.
okay, yes,
Yeah.
sir.
It's a little frightening. Yeah. I'm
Off to
gone. I'm
Georgia.
a ghost.
Yeah.
Yeah. I guess so.
Um, and so, I was in Georgia, I would say a couple years after, and I was in Sri Lanka a couple years after their civil war. I guess I was in places that hadn't yet recovered from what had happened beforehand, but
Hmm.
I was never like, in the heart of it.
Yeah.
How do you manage that? So kind of scarier situations or things that so the Turkish military. Um, I read an article that Troy Shantz wrote where you were held up at one point. Um, it was an article from 2020, and like how do you manage that mentally? Like how do you get through that? I feel like I would just be turtling and shit in my pants. Like
Basically the
honestly.
same. Basically the same.
Okay.
Uh, I think I would like to remember the first time something like where you're like, oh my God, am I going to end up in jail for this? Uh, right off the top of my head, I'm coming back from uh, Southeast Asia into Australia, and the um, border security, the customs security, they asked for my bank details at the checkpoint, right? They wanted to make sure they had enough money to enter there on a tourist visa. I've been going back and forth a few times without anybody asking me that. I knew it was possible. I knew it could happen, but I was taking my chances. So when they did that, I had 300 bucks in my bank account and $100 in my pocket, and they were like, "What the hell are you doing here? You don't have any money." I was like, "Oh, I'm gonna book a flight. It's my friend's wedding in New Zealand, and I'm gonna get a working holiday visa there." Blah 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 blah. Right away, they put me in customs. They checked all my gear. Looking through my laptop, flash disks, everything. They can see all of my movement, right? So I'm going back and forth from Southeast Asia. I'm working a month in Australia as a carny and then taking that money, going to Southeast Asia for 5 months, coming back, doing it again, going to Southeast Asia for 5 months, coming back. So they were convinced that I was a drug dealer or some kind of
Yeah.
runner or something, right? They
Yeah.
they assumed that I was running drugs back and forth. So they went through this whole thing, and then when they realized that obviously I'm not that drug mule or whatever, they figured this guy's working illegally. So there was a flyer in my backpack that I was staying with a couple of girls that I'd met in Laos, and the one girl we hooked up. So I stayed in her bunk for like a month or like 3 weeks while I was working at Carnival in Sydney. And the hostel people never caught on. And I just go in and out as I pleased, managing to avoid paying any rent while I was doing this Carnival gig, right? And then these two girls, we all went to Philippines together. Anyway, so she leaves this flyer, or somehow this flyer got into my bag from her work.
Oh no.
Oh wow.
And they're like, "So you're working at this place?" I'm like, "I don't even know what that place is." Um, and so then there was a big grill and blah blah blah. And I told them that I'm getting some money. I'm inheriting some money because my grandma had passed away, which was true, but not the inheritance. So they called my mom. Uh, they literally asked for her phone number, called her at whatever time it was in Sarnia. And my mom answers and she's like, "Yeah, yeah, 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 yeah." Like, sure, 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 sure. Thankfully, right? Because otherwise, I don't know. I might have been put in a detainment cell until I could figure out my way out,
Right.
pay my flight, whatever it was. So I got really, really lucky on that one. And the whole time, my hands are vibrating. So I think each time something like that happens, your hands vibrate a bit less.
Oh,
Um,
okay.
I spent about 18 hours in a holding cell in Poland because I'd overstayed a visa 3 or 4 months in the Schengen area of Europe, and they gave me a little brötchen. It's like a small German baguette, really small one, and like some spam kind of stuff. That's
Okay.
it. that,
Lovely.
Wow.
that was my meal. I'm like, thanks, guys. Um, and I had to sign so many papers. Like the amount of bureaucracy was insane. And so I ended up getting banned from Poland for 2 years. I had 2 weeks to get out of the country, but I bought a flight actually right then. As soon as they let me out, I ordered a flight to Dublin, no, to Shannon on the west coast of Ireland. Had to pay a pretty handsome amount for a last minute flight over there. Um, but it got me out of the situation. I I wasn't too sure if I would get banned for 10 years from the whole Schengen. Um, but you just eventually you're just like, okay, whatever. Like this, certain things I need to do in order to keep going, right? In order to eat, in order to like, I got to find a job in Europe, or else I got to go home. I don't want to
Right.
go home.
Yeah.
I don't want to go home. I want to continue trying to figure this out. So find an illegal job. If I get caught doing that illegal job, I get sent home. Fair enough. Okay. So I lived in Europe for 5 years. Um, I was overstayed for the majority of that time.
Oh, okay.
Uh,
That's wild.
so I guess eventually, like, your skin gets thick enough, right?
Do you get excited when you're going to a new place? So let's say you're in a place that's kind of comfortable. So you're talking about staying at a hostel for like 30 days for free. When you leave that place, is it more? Do you get more of a sense of excitement because you're going to a new spot, or is it more kind of nerve wracking because you're like, oh great, I got to set myself up again for the next little while?
Yeah, I really don't like the setting myself up again vibe, actually. Like, it was good for a while. You know, I think if I'd started when I was 20, things would have been a bit different as well, because hostels are fun in your early 20s, even in your late 20s. But as you get older, I don't know, they're not as fun.
Yeah, I guess not. Do you?
Starts to hurt, maybe.
Yeah, it might start to bug you. So it's funny you talk about staying in places like hostels. Does it bug you when people come up to you and they talk to you about your travels and they're like, "Oh, I love to travel. We went to this resort in Mexico
Yeah,
and I went to like." Does that bug you at all when you're like, "No, no, that's not travel. That's like
I
luxury."
I don't want to be like, oh, you think that that's travel. And I really don't think that I'm that way. I'm more like, oh, that's cool. Did you check out? Uh.
Hmm.
So in the case of Mexico, there's really no instances because everything is very touristy there.
Yeah.
At
Well,
least
like
from
you
what
could
I saw.
use yeah, like Cuba. If you went to Cuba, did you go to Havana?
Yeah.
Like, or did you just
Um,
stay on your resort and stay in the bus and that kind of thing?
for example, okay, great way to avoid all the tourism is to jump on the road and hitchhike. Did you
Okay.
did you try to, venture out into villages? Oh no, I stayed at my hotel. All right, well, maybe next time I would recommend, you know, going out into the countryside and trying to find some of these villages and meeting like real people that live in that country and see what they're like, because it's probably going to give you a different opinion.
Yeah.
And then some people
Okay.
will be like, oh, you think you're so smart. And the others will be like, that's a really good idea. I didn't really think about that.
Yeah.
Right.
Majority of people coming back to Sarnia were like, you think you're so smart.
Is that right?
Yeah, basically. It was like, oh, you've been everywhere, so now you know. I'm like, well, no, but I have an insight of, one or two things.
Well, and that's the thing. As Josh alluded to earlier, we just hear about places on the media or in movies or whatever, and you're
Yeah,
never getting
movies
that
is a really big
real.
one, man.
Yeah, you're not getting that real picture of what it's actually like. So you've actually been able to see that
I lived
and
in
witness it.
Kazakhstan for a year and a half. How many people do you think said,
Borat.
Borat.
oh, is that country that's from Borat?
Yeah. They probably didn't even think it was real.
Yeah.
Is that a real place? Oh, I thought it was just pretend.
Is it really like in the movie?
Yeah,
Yeah, yeah,
really.
yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
totally.
Borat was there.
I mean, they have probably more oil and gas than majority of countries in Asia, but yeah, it's exactly
Yeah.
like that.
Lot of great
Um,
MMA fighters too.
Yeah.
yeah. Well, I mean, the whole society in Central Asia, especially Kyrgyzstan, Kazakhstan, and Mongolia, they love all things fighting. Like,
Yeah.
it goes all the way back to, riding on horses and throwing
Hmm.
spears and all that stuff, shooting arrows. Like, they are serious warrior cultures back in the day. Um, so of course, wrestling and boxing and all of the, the national sport of Kyrgyzstan. I can't remember what it's called. It's the name. I'm not going to get the name, but you ride on horses. It's like polo. It's like, you know, you got kind of stick, except in this case, there's no stick, just your hand, I think. I haven't actually seen it live. And there's a dead sheep carcass, and you grab this thing, and then you got to race it over to, I guess a goal, and you have to throw it in the goal. and other people are riding their horse towards you, trying to take it out of your hand.
That's
The,
That does sound like
wild.
something out of Borat.
yeah, it's like a dead sheep carcass, like just
Wow.
bones.
That's
Oh my
wild.
gosh. Yeah,
Yeah,
that's
it's
pretty crazy.
amazing. And they
Yeah, I mean, I
actually
would pay to see it. I would pay to see it.
and they actually still play it, and it, like I can see where it came from. You know what I mean? I can see like a bunch of people bored on horses, and there's not much out there in the outback of Kyrgyzstan in those mountains except
Mhm.
sheep and nature. So absolutely stunning, beautiful country, but not a lot around. So I could see how like these, they're like, oh yeah, throw it around, and then it becomes a sport, and then it becomes the national sport, and it's still the national sport. And I think, yeah, way to go, guys. I really root for these countries that are trying to hold on to their cultural uh, not integrity, but like the things that make them culturally unique from one
Yeah, like
another.
the roots kind of thing.
Yeah, like their
Yeah.
grassroots traditions.
Nice.
Obviously, everyone for the last 20 or 30 or 40 years has been learning how to speak English.
Mhm.
In some countries, they were speaking a colonial language before that. So they're in a really big risk of losing their own language.
Yeah.
Right.
And in Central Asia, you have that sort of situation a bit. And a lot of these countries are doing their best because they were speaking Russian for, 80 to 150 years. Um, they're trying their best to bring back their older culture and get people to speak their original language again, so it doesn't fade into history.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I have a question about your book. So, unfortunately, I just got this a week ago, so I'm only a quarter way through it.
That's all right. That's
Um,
good, man. A quarter in a week is awesome. That's faster than I read.
I'm a slow reader, um, but it's a really interesting book. It's really well written, and
Yeah.
you got the character Freddie Woomba, which I would
Mm.
assume is based on yourself.
Yeah.
How much of the book is reality? How much of it is fiction? Did you have to embellish anything?
Yeah. I mean, not so much embellish, just rearrange.
Okay,
So like, you know, this might happen in the book, but it might have happened at some other given time.
okay,
Just to make the lineage right.
yeah,
And
Mhm.
then, there's one character, uh, which is actually like five characters. So like five
ah,
people I met, I combine into like one person.
I see.
Um, Also, there are certain things that didn't happen at all. Um, so I don't know. It's probably about 85% nonfiction.
Cool.
Um,
I really like. I enjoy the writing. I think like, did you have any training, any literary training at all?
no, I've been writing since I was a teenager. Like you were in a punk band, I wanted to be in a band, but I didn't know how to play any instruments.
Okay,
So I wanted to sing, but none of my friends would give me a chance.
okay,
So I would like write lyrics in notebooks, and then
nice.
at some point, somebody turned me on to Wu-Tang Clan,
Hmm.
and when I was a little kid, when I was like grade 5, grade 6, grade 7, I really liked hip hop, rap music, crisscross,
Yeah,
backwards
yeah,
jeans and all that.
yeah,
But
man.
I was kind of insulted when I got a bit older for listening to rap music. It was like, oh, why aren't you listening to grunge music? Blah, blah, blah. So I
Yeah,
kind of got away from it and went into punk rock. And then around 16 or 17 years old, somebody played some Wu-Tang Clan. And I was like, holy crap, what the hell is this? And of
yeah.
course, I was listening to Cypress Hill because I smoked a massive amount of weed.
Hmm.
Um, but all of this like Puff Daddy and all that, like even Notorious B.I.G. I absolutely love B.I.G.
Yeah,
Um, amazing MC, also just like super creative, really unique character, really dominated the industry. Um, but at the time, because he was popular, I was just like, like
Yeah, yeah.
anything, you know what I mean? Anything
I was the
popular
same
was like,
way, man. Yeah.
ugh.
Yeah, you find your identity or your alternative identity through music in ways, right? Like that was me too.
Yeah, exactly. And I skateboarded, so it was like, ooh,
Me too.
I'm, I'm on the other side. And so eventually I got into hip hop, writing rhymes, and I started trying be this MC, spitting freestyles with friends. I went out west in 2000. I met some people. They were pretty serious about trying to make this thing work, and I just got more into it. But I knew that I wasn't really that probably wasn't going to work for me. And I also just got more and more into traveling and cooking, and so I just started writing. And then I read Anthony Bourdain's book, Kitchen Confidential, in 2004, shortly after it came out. And I just thought,
Okay.
wow, this guy is really doing it. Like he's showing the industry, he's showing everything that's happening, uh, but in like a very good literary way. And he
Mhm.
was influenced by the same writers that I was starting to get into. William Burroughs being one of the major ones, Jack Kerouac, that sort of beatnik era
I
and
was
pre
I was going
beatnik.
to ask you your influences because I definitely got a Kerouac feel from the meeting of the characters and the dialogue and everything like that.
Yeah, like Kerouac, absolutely, of course, On the Road is a classic. The first time somebody gave it to me, I was hitchhiking across Canada, and I read it, and it went right over my head.
Hmm.
Didn't get it at all. I read it in France when I was picking grapes. I was again working illegally, trying to find a job, waiting for a farm to give me a job. They had helicopters flying around counting the people on the field picking grapes.
Okay.
So it was really hard to find a under the table job. Eventually, I got a passport picture. I had my picture replaced into the passport picture, and I had it photocopied, and I became John uh, O'Connell. He was a My friend in Ireland had arranged it for me and got me this photocopied picture. So I became this Irish guy because Irish don't need a visa to work in the Schengen. So everybody starts calling me John, right? Hey, John. I'm not answering. John, John. Oh, right. Yeah, yeah, yeah. What?
Right. That's
Um,
You got
me.
a hearing issue.
anyway, while I'm trying to figure out this job, because I got very little money left, there's a library down the road. So I go to the library, and they've got this little English section, and On the Road is in there. And I'm like, okay, yeah, I'll give it a spin again. So I read it. Oh my God, absolutely incredible. Absolutely incredible. The writing is great, but the way that he encapsulates the road experience,
Hmm.
like he just really, like, I lived through my own experiences in that book. He somehow in the 50s he wrote about things that I went through myself, but in a
Yeah.
way that I could really identify with them. And
Yeah.
that is the thing, you know what I mean? Like reading the For Whom the Bell Tolls, Hemingway just kills it with the being able to identify with what's going on in this Civil War time, and like how these villagers sorry, not how, what are these villagers going through, how are they living. Like he just does such a great job at describing all of the nuances, giving you a really big picture of what's going on, but in a fictional setting, right?
Right.
um yeah,
S-
so
So there's definitely some Josh is a self-published author too. He can talk to that, but
oh yeah,
I would say similar stylings, right, Josh? You were taking some of your real life experiences and creating fiction from it.
Yeah, I was calling it a work of faction because it was like, I don't know,
faction,
half
half
real,
facts
half
half fiction.
pretend. Yeah, exactly. So that was kind of how I described it. But yeah, mine was about living in Vancouver because I moved out to Vancouver, ended up homeless at one point, and
Oh yeah,
spent time in hostels and stuff like that. So there was elements of that I brought
so
in.
you stayed at the
I'm curious.
Canby.
I did say I did at one point. Yeah, absolutely.
I also
Yeah.
stayed at the Canby for a bit.
Yeah, I stayed there I think 2 or 3 nights when I was out there. They weren't together, they were separate, but yeah. Um, I noticed one thing, like through the interviews you did, and also through talking with you today, you really have. You could tell that you have a very soft spot for villages, just by the way you talk about villages and villagers. You seem to have a
Mm,
soft spot for it. Maybe I'm speaking out of line, but
no.
what is it? What is it about that? Like these smaller areas that you've gone to that has really sort of left an impression on you versus maybe going to the cities and stuff like that in these other countries.
Yeah, I mean, obviously, I've worked in the cities because that's where the economy is,
Hmm.
um, which is, it's tough, right? We are seeing the counter movement. Like, we're the first generation to really see people actually leaving the city and going back to the countryside.
Yeah,
Mhm.
Um, COVID really, really kicked that off big time. Like, it
yeah,
was happening before, but COVID has really send it spiraling. Sarnia is so expensive to buy housing now, and I mean it's because of that, right?
yeah,
We can blame Chinese immigrants or Japanese investors or whoever you want to blame. It's people who don't want to live in the city anymore, leaving out to the countryside. Um,
yeah,
so we had this urbanization, and now we're having this counter urbanization, and people have been
yeah. Like a
predicting it
sprawl.
for 20 odd years. Like, I remember hearing about it, back in the day, like, oh, you know what's going to happen, eventually people are going to leave. We didn't know that it would happen so fast.
Yeah,
But it's good. Like, a friend of mine, he has a farm out in Petrolia, Daryl Carver, and he does, he sells chicken breasts and chicken thighs and stuff. And he does pork as well, like really, really good organic pork. Um, if we don't go back to the countryside, we're going to lose everything.
hmm,
Like, we
We're
need farmers. We need people to do agriculture. We need people to be motivated to grow rice. You
yeah,
know, we can't be like, oh, I want to work online and make $100,000 every 3 months. You
yeah,
know, I understand, like, of course it's an advantage. You want to make money and you want to do minimal work. That's awesome.
yeah,
But if we don't have these people who are like genuinely motivated by doing the real work,
yeah,
yeah,
we're in big crap.
yeah. Well, the
yeah,
backbone of society, right? The fact, like, we all, man's got to eat.
That's
Yeah,
why I go there, because it's the backbone of society, and that's where you're going to find the way that real people live. And
hmm,
when I first started traveling, it was all about. I remember when I was hitchhiking across Canada, I met this guy Ari, and he'd been to 35 countries. He was working in Grand Cayman as a bartender, and he told me all these stories about Cambodia and so forth. I was like, wow, that's so amazing. And he was like, yeah, I came back to Canada because I realized I have everything here. He was in the
yeah,
Okanagan. He was in Penticton. And so he's surrounded by nature and beauty and agriculture and so on and so forth. Um, so I was kind of in the same parallel. Like, I want to go see waterfalls and have parties and drink with expats from different countries and be a backpacker and all that stuff. I did it for a little while, and I was like, there's got to be more to this.
yeah,
yeah, yeah,
Like, that was fun, but there's got to be something else. And that's what led me to walk the Camino de Santiago, because I was looking for the something else. I was not I was at the end of my road with actual traveling. I had done some really big hiking. I'd been able to explore some really nice areas and meet some really, genuinely local people just toughing it out and doing their thing. So I felt like I got a bit of a connection. I can go home now. You know what I mean? I've lived out what I originally planned to do. I stayed in India and learned how to cook Indian food. I was in Thailand and like I just never had any cultural connection to Thailand, and because it's just so touristy in the areas where all of the foreigners go, right? Um, and so I just figured, it's time to go back home and maybe concentrate on something else. But the other side of me is saying, no, there's really like something out here for me, and so it led me on the way. And then I walked from Rome to Istanbul the next year, um, and then I hitchhiked 25,000 kilometers around Europe and Africa. And when I got into Africa, I really started to see colonial effects, modern colonial effects and prior colonial effects. The cacao, for example, Ivory Coast has a couple of cash crops. They have the trees, which are, there's only one third of their rainforest remaining. And then they have the cacao, which is number two, I'm pretty sure, or vice versa. So they grow all of this for Nestle. Nestle controls the cost of the cacao. If they decide to, you know, charge less, then the farmers get crazy angry and they start fighting. So Nestle has the ability to start a civil war. I mean, that's
Wow.
insane. This Western, American or European company has the ability to to decide this country's future. Um,
Mm-hmm.
and it's the same thing with the political leaders. You have French politicians that are trying to get this person in power because this person is going to make decisions which are benefiting French development, like whether it be the corporations that are in the country. And then you have, all these companies that are from France, in French West Africa, and the highest tier positions are all French people from France. They're not Africans, they're not people from that country. Okay,
Mm-hmm.
number one, they aren't educated enough to do those jobs. They don't have the work experience to do that. They don't know how. So why aren't we teaching them to do that? Why are we continuing to put French or American or Canadian? You know what I mean? Like at some point we got to say, okay, you know what? Let's train all these people to do it themselves and move out of the way.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
They got to be more educated than our politicians, right? Like honestly.
yeah, truly, truly,
You know what's
Let's
you know
be
what's
absolutely.
funny
honest
is
here.
about what you're saying is that over the last, I forget what it is, 20 or 30 years, like we've pulled half of the world out of extreme poverty. Like we being like the world has pulled half of the world out of extreme poverty. But there is almost this force that's like doesn't want them to get too close to the Western world. It's like, all right, you guys are out of extreme poverty, but you can stay right where you are. It's just a tick above it. And
Yeah,
we're
I mean,
good
we
with
still
you
got to
there.
make money, right? Like the Canadian oil and gas companies, for example, they got to continue making money. So,
Yeah.
they need to keep themselves in a position of um, demand. So
Yeah.
we have the biggest drills in the world, right? So
Mm-hmm.
any country that wants to dig something, they call us and they say, "Oh, can we get these drills?" And then they pay insane amounts of whatever it is, bursary or um, you know okay, we're going to give you these drills, we're going to give you this equipment, and that entitles us to 40% of whatever you pull out of the ground.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
And then they're
Yeah.
Um,
also having to take loans from the banks and then they're just in their pockets too. And
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
and that World Bank thing is also like that's another thing that I didn't really know until I went to West Africa and saw like how deep these countries are into World Bank.
Yeah.
And as you said, stupid politicians. It really comes down to stupid politicians. Like, why are these people not being educated in Africa? It's not necessarily France's fault. It's not the States' fault. It's the politicians that are in power there. They make the decisions. I was in Gambia and I crossed the border from Senegal into Gambia at night. And I didn't realize I'd crossed the border and I didn't get a stamp to enter Gambia. So when I leave Gambia, they're going to be like, "Where's your stamp? Give me X amount of money
Mm.
so that you can leave. Give me my backsheesh and you can go." And I'm like, "Okay, I got to avoid that. I don't want to. I don't want to do that. So I got to go find a way to get this stamp in my passport." So I go all over the place. I spend a few days trying to figure out how to get this stupid thing. And then I go to this office where they're going to give me this stamp apparently. And there's 8 people in this office, really small office, totally hotboxed with cigarettes. There's a small little old school TV in the top corner. Everybody's got their feet up on the table. They're all chilling. They got drinks in their hands. They're smoking. They're watching the football.
Amazing.
Wow.
This is like, I don't know, the immigration office or whatever, right? And so what happens, and this is why I go to the countryside, and I'm still trying to answer this question. What happens is whoever gets in power, whether it's municipal or provincial or federal, whoever gets in power, they are from one tribe because everything is nepotism in these countries. Also in Central Asia, there's a lot of nepotism. It's like this tribe is holding the power, so they want to make sure none of the other tribes get it. And we're kind of the same in the West, right? It's like, oh, okay,
Yeah.
I have the power, US. We
Just
want to
class.
make sure that all the others don't get too much to overcome
Yeah.
us, right?
Yeah.
World wars, Germany, France, et cetera, et cetera. So these guys, they're like, okay, we're in power. We don't want them in power. So they hire all their cousins and brothers and uncles to work these municipal jobs, civil jobs. Civil jobs pay pretty well compared to non-civil jobs. They have some
Mhm.
kind of benefit system. Even if it's small. They have reasons to want to work for government, obviously, just like here. Um, so they hire all these people that are family members because they want their family to be at the advantage. But these family members don't know how to do any of the jobs they're hired to do.
Unreal.
So they got the same problems over there that we got here. Sounds
Yes,
like, or at least some of them. Yeah.
that's it. That's it, man.
Yeah.
I'm telling you. It's funny. And in order to see what we have here, I had to go and see it someplace else.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. You
that
get
makes
it
sense.
opens your eyes, I'm sure. Yeah.
Yeah.
Steve, so what's next for you?
I'm pretty close to finished. I want to do this like hitchhiking handbook.
Okay.
So right now I'm looking at 85 stories, all of the stories under 1,200 words. Um, and just like various random stories from giving you a very quick example. I was in Mexico. I was cursing this guy. Why doesn't a nice car ever stop and pick me up? Because all the nice cars, they always drive by. I'm like, why don't they stop? Why don't they stop? This beautiful brand new BMW pulls up, tinted windows, everything. I jump inside excited because I've been waiting so long and it's super hot outside. And I realize that the guy's in a Speedo.
Okay.
And very quickly, he's pulling his dick and balls out of his Speedo.
Jesus.
I'm like, oh God. So I had to jump out of the car. Another quick example, I was in Austria and a guy dropped me off at a rest stop so I could get my next lift. And he pulls out his phone and he's like, no, he said, oh, can I get a picture of you? And I thought, why not? And then he pulled out his phone and he started showing me dick pics.
So he wanted to
He wanted a
he
dick
wanted
pic, and I was
just
like,
one part of you.
howdy.
Yep.
Wow.
So yeah, all those kinds of like random, the best of and the worst of and the shortest and the longest and like all over the world, like I said, I hitchhiked 120,000 kilometers. So I've crossed half the planet hitchhiking and walking. So there's a lot of pretty good stories in there. Also, I'm going to be finishing my second book, which is called Lifer. And that one, lifer, like somebody who spends their life in jail. This
Mhm.
is sort of like a lifer, somebody who spends their life on the road.
Okay. Yeah.
Um,
Really cool.
and essentially the main story is that, you know, the culture of backpacking and long-term traveling and stuff is being really exploited, really, really exploited by digital nomads, by Instagram, TikTok, all of this stuff. It's like, oh, you know, I got to get money so I can continue traveling. I get it totally, but you shouldn't be selling yourself. You know, like, look at me and look at what I'm doing,
Yeah.
uh, just so that you can keep yourself going. Like, I don't know, it's a weird narrative, right? And then you're standing in front of a waterfall, this like really beautiful waterfall, and going, oh, you could do this too. Follow me, right? Like,
Yeah.
let me be your
Yeah.
influencer. But, you know, 2 days later, you've got food poisoning and you're pissing yellow stuff out of your ass because it happens. It happens very often. I've had dysentery probably 10 times.
Oh wow.
Uh,
Wow.
in the book,
Jeez.
in the
That's
book, you're
awful.
going to read about a water poisoning episode where in Montenegro, there's a little area where the water is not treated, and none of the locals told me. And I walk up house to house, going, "Can I get water, please?" Because I'm walking the way, right? So people are giving me water, and I'm drinking it, and then suddenly I'm getting really weak and really tired, and then all of a sudden, eventually, blah blah blah, I'm projectile vomiting everywhere, and then at
Jeez.
night, I'm in my tent, and it's crazy raining outside, and I got to run outside to have my little diarrhea session.
Oh man. That
Um,
sounds
Wow.
awful.
but there's really a lot of that stuff, and if you're not going through that stuff, then I'm sorry, you're not really traveling. You know.
There it is. That's what. Yeah, yeah. That's a perfect note to end on.
Yeah, for sure. All right.
Yeah.
Thanks
Thank
so
you
much.
Thank
so
you, guys.
much, dude.
Thanks.
When you're back from your trip, we'll have to get together, and maybe we'll have you back on at some point too when you've
Yeah, sounds good. That's
got your
cool.
second book on the go or something like that.